In this demonstration, we're going to take a look at how do we create a predictive planning model. And I can see I'm starting in my home page of my Analytics Cloud system. First thing I want to do is create a new model for my predictive planning. So I'm going to my left menu and go into my modular. I'm going to create a new model from a CSV file and select my source. And in this case, we can use the monthly sales per genre, which can be found in the zip file of the GitHub. I'm going to open this and select import. Now it's going to take a couple of minutes to run and import the file. We can see it has been successfully completed. And we can just take a quick look here to see what data we have and what we're going to use for our planning model. So we have month from 2011 to the first month, all the way down to 2021, the 8th month. That looks pretty good. We can see our clusters, and our clusters is just our genre IDs that's been identified into clusters. And then we have our measure here, which is our book sales. So all of this looks pretty good. Now to create the model, we're just going to make sure we click on enable planning and that the period is defined by month. And with that, we're going to click create model and verify that we are creating it. Now we're just going to quickly save this model. So I'm going to go into my folder and I'm going to go with sales planning and click OK. So now it's going to generate and save this model. We get the message that's been successfully created. So now we are ready to utilize this model. But for planning, we want to do one more thing. So I'm going to go into my workspace and I'm going to go into my model structure, which brings me to my star shape chart here. And I want to edit the preferences of this model for using. So I'm going to go into my general model preferences, which is going to load up my preference table. And under planning and time ranges, I'm going to click on that. I want to do a planning model for the next year. So what I'm going to do is just change the time range here to the 31st of next year. So I have a whole year I could utilize to input and change and enter the predictive modeling. And click OK. So now I'm just going to save it. And the model has been successfully saved. So now I'm going back to my stories. And I'm going to open my demo story. And we're going to continue building on our story page here. So I'm going to edit. And what I want to do now is add a new page. There we go. I do not need this extra pane, so I'm going to delete that. So now I can start working on building the planning table here. Before that, let's just add this new model to our data. So I click on data and I'm going to click on add new data and say data from existing dataset or model. And in here, I'm going to select other model. And just going to go to where I have saved that model I just created. And we can see sales planning here. So I'm going to select my sales planning model. And that's going to load it up into my data explorer. And I can see here all it's now been loaded up. And I can go back to my story table. So in the story, I'm going to click insert new table. And by default, it should select my sales planning. That is correct. And we can see the table here and the left side has loaded. So next thing we want to do is we want to add some rows. So we're going to go into our rows and say add measure and dimension. And scroll down to where we see cluster. So we want to group it by cluster. So in our rows, we can see our clusters has been added. And we want to add more columns across by the year month. So we're gonna go and add our month parameter date here. So we can see it has added it. So I can click on expand. So we can see all the years here has been added. And finally, let's just click on full size so we can see the completed data table. Excellent. So we can see now we have it from 2011 to 2021. And I am just going to save this model quickly, or story quickly. Okay, and next. So to start utilizing this for a planning model, we want to create a private version of this first. So what we're going to do is go into our more options of the top menu bar and select our version control. So in the version control, you can see the different versions, public version and a private version. I'm going to copy this public version to my private version. So I'm going to click copy. I'm going to give it a quick name, predictive planning, and just give it my initials so I know which version that is. And I'm going to select a category. You can see you can do a couple of different private versions. You can do budget, planning, forecast, rolling forecast. In this case, I'm going to do a predictive forecast. So I'm going to click on forecast. And I'm going to create a blank version for now. So with that, I'm going to click on OK. And it's copied successfully. And now I just want to save this one more time. And we are good to go. So next what we're going to do is we're going to go to our more option. And we're going to look at our predictive scenarios. So we click on our predictive scenarios. So we can see here we have a classification, regression, and time series forecast. And this predictive scenario, we want to do a time series forecast where we're going to use the historical data to forecast the next 12 months for us. So we're going to click on time series forecast here. It's going to require us to give it a name. So I'm just going to name it, give it my initials, predictive planning. And of course, I'm going to save it under my folder that I've been using. And I'm going to click on OK. So now it's going to take me to my predictive scenario builder here. And we are going to go next, select our source. So let's select our model we created. So I go to where I saved the model. So here we can see our sales planning model that we just saved. So I'm going to select that. Now you can see under settings, once I have selected it, I have more options for the predictive goal to select. And we're going to first specify our target, which is going to be our book sales. And next at once, because this is time series, we have to specify a time range and a time field. So we're going to select our month field. And here you can see under time granularity that this is by month. And the number of forecast periods, we want to do 12-month forecast. So we can input 12 here. So also I want to pivot these forecast models. So what I want to do instead of building just one model is build 8 models based on the genre ID clusters. So in my entity, I'm going to select where I want to pivot these model forecast on. And I'm going to select my cluster, which has 8 different clusters. So I'm going to select that. And now I have the clusters, which is going to pivot and build 8 forecast models for each number in the cluster. And finally, what I want to do is I want to make sure I don't have no negative forecasts. So all my negative forecasts I want to convert to 0. So I'm just going to turn this on. And that's it. So now what I want to do is train and do the forecast. So I'm going to click on train and forecast here. And the system is going to process, and this can take a couple of minutes. We can now see it has the overview here for us. We can see our top entities, and we can see the expected map. And that's our mean absolute percentage error. And we can see some of them is really good, some of them has some error, and you can see 7 has a 30% error rating, and that just has to do with the data that's not maybe not all fully complete, or some errors in the data, which is normally expected with large quantity of data. And we can see the reverse here on the bottom entities, and we can see the average expected map PE map is 10.2%, which is pretty good. We can also click on the entities in our clusters and take a look at the individual forecast models generated for it. We can again see the expected map for this one is less than 10%, which is 8.9, which is very good. And here we can see a couple of line graphs being displayed. So we can see the light blue one is our actual model data that has been mapped out across this time series. And the dark blue one is our forecasted model, which follows all the way to 2022. And out with the 22, we can see the outer maximum band and our minimum band here. So we have two bands, max and min, for our forecasted model. And we can see a couple of red dots, which might indicate some outliers that might be influencing the data a bit. So we can see how well this predictive forecast model is fitting to my actual data. So that's pretty good indication that the data is pretty well forecasted. And if I scroll down here, it gives me my forecast per month, with again my max and min percent forecasted as well. And this will be injected into my planning model. I can also see a bit more details about this forecast by clicking on the explanation page. And what this will do is decompose the forecast created for this particular cluster into its components. So we can see here is for cluster 5, we have trend, cycles, and fluctuations. So we can see here on the trend that it kind of follows a linear trend over time. And in the cycles, we can also see we observe some on a monthly basis, a recurring pattern every semester. So there's some peaks that follow and some downtimes and uptimes that generates these cycles. So we can take a look at that in our graph here. So we can see our trend that has been generated over the period of time. And then this orange one, which is our cycle. So we can see these peaks and downtimes that we observe during these different periods, which generates our cycles. And we can also scroll down and we can look at these, interesting enough, the fluctuations, which takes a look at the lags of the data. So we can see it generates a lag of 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, and it goes all the way back and helps look at the data to see if it can contribute to make a more accurate forecast. So here we can see it has found some. So in each of these periods going back up to 23 months, it has adjusted the forecast with this lag data input. So we can see this is quite a sophisticated time series. So not only does it look at the trends that is happening in the data, it also looks at the cycles, but it also does this auto regression that it looks at the lag of the data to help create this predictive forecasting model. So now we want to inject this data into our predictive model that we've created. So what we're going to do next is we're going to go up to here where we say Save Forecast. And what we're going to do is select our predictive planning forecast that we created our private version. And we're just going to go and click on Save. All right, so now it's going to inject all this data and create it into my predictive model that I have saved as a private version. So now let's take a look at what it's done and how it's injected this data into my story that I've created. So let's go into our stories again. and open my demo story. Okay, so now we go back to our edit and let's go take a look at our predictive planning model. So here we can see it as table. So I'm just going to go in and click on view all, full screen. And now we can see here's my actual model, and here it has generated my predictive model. So I can click and expand that now, and I can see this by here. And we can go all the way out. So you can see here is my 2021 and my 2022. So we can clean this up a little bit quickly just by clicking here. And let's show and hide, and let's say we want to say 0 columns. Okay, there we go. So now I can see here is my actual planning for 2021. We can see the remainder of 2021. So there we go. And then we also have it for 2022. So we can see it by quarter. And if I want to drill a bit and more for details for Q4, and now I can see it by month. So now we've seen we created basically a new story page. We imported the data first that we can use for the model. We created a data model on that data. We came in and created a sales planning page here for this model. And with that done, we created a private version. We went into our predictive scenarios, created a time series where we forecasted for the next 12 months. We then used that for a predictive forecast and injected it back into our planning model here. And now we can see it, all the data by month for each cluster. Now, that's as simple as that. So now we have a full predictive planning model ready to go. And we can obviously clean this up. Let's do that quickly. Let's add some splash of color. All right. Oh. I meant to add the color on the text. There we go. And now we can take a look at the rest of the table. I can add some color there as well. There we go. And with that, we have now successfully created our story. Last thing to do is just rename this to our planning model. And we now successfully created a full completed story using live data, using imported data, creating a predictive scenario, and doing predictive planning. So let's take a quick look at the final version of our story. So we can see here, it's loading it up. So here is our planning model. So we can see how this looks now, and with our predictive components in as well. We can go and take a look at our sales overview. So here's our first page. Here's our sales table we created, our corporate table view, which is all the data. Our smart sales, where we use the smart insights. And we added a forecast report, doing a sales forecast on a small time series here. And finally, we have our predictive pricing, where we predicted the value of the book and wrapped it up with our planning model, now that we can see our predictive planning. And a quick snap forward to the completed page with coloring and everything now added as well. So we can see we have completed a full storyboard with utilizing different methods and different smart features. And this concludes the demonstration of building a story with live data and the smart functionalities using imported data.